Hi everyone, welcome to part 2 of the PCA homework video walkthrough. Now you have your output from this procedure. It says factor analysis at the top here, but don't be thrown off by that. This is indeed a PCA that we ran. Remember, those two techniques are very similar, and it's housed within the family of factor analytic techniques. So it probably should say PCA, but it doesn't. We have plenty of boxes here that SPSS has generated for us. Some of them we can just ignore, but I will walk through and make sure you know which ones are important and how to interpret what they say. You remember that there were assumptions or verifications that we needed to make in order to assure the assumption that we can even do a PCA or a factor analysis given the data set that we had. One of those things was the ratio of participants to variables, and we said we were at 11.5 to 1, which was good. But the other two are the KMO, or Kaiser-Meyer-Olkin measure of sampling adequacy, and Bartlett's test of sphericity. That's a lot of syllables, but let me break it down for you. All those things are doing is ensuring that the correlations that we have within this PCA, all of those 26 variables interacting with one another, that those correlations are strong enough to allow us to actually do a factor analysis. If they were all weak, then we could run this thing, but we're not going to find any definitive results. So, KMO, Kaiser-Meyer-Olkin measure. This tells us if the magnitude of the correlations is large enough to proceed, and it needs to be at least 0.5. That's the rule of thumb. And as you can see, rounding up, we've got a 0.87 KMO. So that's good. Moving to Bartlett's test. Bartlett's test of sphericity is a significance test with a p-value assessing whether or not the matrix of correlations formed in this procedure is significantly different from one that we might create just randomly. So we need that p-value to be significant. In other words, we need it to be 0.05 or lower to make sure that our correlations are indeed stronger than ones we would find or encounter by chance. And as you can see, the significance level, the p-value, is very, very low. So that means we are in good shape. A significant Bartlett's test means you may proceed. So scrolling down, you're going to skip this next box called communalities and get to this one, total variance explained. What is going on here? Well, you see we have all 26 of our variables represented here. And this is showing us the different components that the computer clustered together for us. Actually, the computer didn't do it. The computer detected it, but these are the different clusters that are occurring naturally in the data when you run this technique. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them, and then you see the data cuts off down here. Why is that? Well, remember when we stipulated that the eigenvalue must be at least 1 or higher? These are the eigenvalues. You see they're repeated right here, but it's the same thing here. And 1.015 is as low as we want to get. So anything after this number 6 component is too small to be worth bothering with. That gives us 6 different components, in other words, 6 clusters that the data are hanging about. The other thing to look at here is the cumulative percent of variance. And these are mirror images, you can see that, but I'm just looking at this one over here. You could read either side. And if we round up, we have 69% cumulative variance. That means that in running this PCA, we're able to explain About 69, close to 70% of the variation in people's responses based on this 6-component model we're talking about. And that's really very good. In real data situations in the real world, you'd be very fortunate to get a cumulative variance percentage that high. So this is mostly informational. We do have to remember 6 components. That's the key takeaway here. We're going to be using the magic number 6. Scrolling down, we're going to skip component matrix. You don't need that. And pattern matrix is the one to pay attention to. The others are extra. You don't need to look at them. What does the pattern matrix do? This tells us which items on our inventory, in other words, which of the 26 variables are hanging together or loading onto the 6 different components. Remember, these numbers here are factor loadings. They're essentially correlation coefficients associated with each of the 26 variables. The eigenvalues, that was something different. Those were numbers that were largely bigger, higher than 1, but they indicated the strength of the clusters themselves. This is at the level of the individual items. And what you can see, we sorted it by size, is they cluster 1 here, then this group is here, we've got a third, we've got a fourth, a fifth, and even down here, we've got 2 clustering together in a 6th. Now here's a quick note. Often when you only have 2 items clustering together, you might say that's not enough to create a component that stands alone. But for the purposes of this exercise, it's fine to have that. You might notice that some of the items have multiple loadings across different components. That's called a cross-loading, when a variable has a moderate to strong association with more than one of the clusters or components. In factor analysis, we would try to eliminate those. So an item like this one, Other Educator, which has 3 different moderate to strong correlations with 3 different components, we would actually maybe remove this item because it's confused, right? It's conflicted. It doesn't associate with just one of the components. It's trying to split itself across 3. In PCA, we don't worry about that, so you can just leave it. The other thing to tell you is that if this was a true exploratory factor analysis, for each one of these components or clusters, we would run an individual reliability test. We'd probably use Cronbach's alpha within these items, and then another one within these, and so on and so forth. That way, we could determine whether each of these components has internal consistency, or what we call reliability. In PCA, we don't worry about that, so we're going to leave that. The last thing to show you in this table is down here, rotation converged in 16 iterations. You remember the one indicator in the box of how many iterations you want the computer to use, and we set it at 25, but I said sometimes you might want to set it higher. Luckily, we only needed 16 turns of doing this procedure to develop this analysis, this output, so that's good. You do want to report how many iterations it took. So that's the pattern matrix. Now there's one more to pay attention to. Structure matrix we're going to ignore, but let's get down here to the component correlation matrix. This will only appear if you choose an oblique rotation, in other words, the Promax rotation. Because if we were to use orthogonal, remember the rule for orthogonal is that we don't have any correlations between components. We're saying that they don't exist. So it actually would not generate this table for you. But that's not realistic. In the real world, everything is correlated with everything else, right? So we're going to read this. And what it says is that the highest correlation, if you scan through all of these numbers, it's showing you the relationships between the components individually in pairs, right? The highest we can find is 0.51, and that's good. If any of these correlations between the components was higher, let's say 0.7 or 0.8, we might need to go back to the drawing board, because that would mean that two or more of these components were so strongly related that they were correlated very highly, and maybe they need to be collapsed together or somehow reconfigured. We don't have that problem, so we're good. So the last step in this procedure is to label your components. So if we go back up to this pattern matrix where we had the different clusters here, what we're looking for is more an art than a science. What we're looking for is a theme that runs through all of these items here that glom together, and some sort of theme or label we could give to all of these items here that glom together, and so on and so forth. The point being that if we can reduce this data down, so instead of using all of these labels here, all 8 of them, we just use one thematic label that we use for the whole component, it makes it much easier to deal with all of this data. So this has been done for you because this came from an actual example. Component number 1, the researchers called educator, because all of these items seem to have to do with their identity as a straightforward mainstream educator. The second one they called ensemble leader, and you can see, I don't have all the definitions in front of me, but conductor, ensemble director, all of these items had them identify with their sense of being an ensemble leader or conductor. So that makes sense to call it ensemble leader. Now the third one, they labeled external identity, because as you can see, other musician had to do with other people's perceptions of them as a musician, other people's perceptions as an artist, as a performer, as a scholar of music. So they called this external identity as a theme. The fourth component they called creative business person. A composer, this might mean something like self-employed composer, entrepreneurship, both their own perception and others. So they called it creative business person. As you can see, they're just coming up with their own labels for these clusters. The fifth one they called internal identity. So unlike the external identity, which was this one, the third one, when we get to the fifth one, they're looking at their internal sense of identifying as a performer, an artist, musician, and scholar of music. So they call that internal identity. And then the last one down here, self-perception as an entertainer, other people's perception as an entertainer. So they just call that entertainer. So that's how they got this 6 labels for these components. Again, they were educator, ensemble leader, external identity, creative business person, internal identity, and entertainer. And you would report those. And it's okay that you artfully created them yourself, because that's part of this technique. The researcher does use their discretion to come up with the labels. When it comes to writing up the results, I want you to go into the Russell textbook, look at page 221. There's an example of the write-up for this particular study on page 219. Study those guidelines and examples, and you'll quickly learn how to write these things up in an organized fashion. So for homework, you're going to do the exact same procedure, a PCA. The data set's a little different. It's 44 items from an inventory that's used to gauge music educators' feelings about their career plans and their work environment. And on page 222 of the Russell textbook, you're going to see a table that lists the descriptions for all of those variables, which you can use to help you when it comes time to do the labeling of the components like I just explained for this example. So have fun with it, and let me know if you get stuck along the way. Good luck.